Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I want to talk about a quite interesting topic, Keynes and Marx. I will tell you today why I disagree with both when it comes to economic theory and why they both saw right problems. Yes, Marx actually saw the right problems in the economy, but I think he came to the wrong conclusion and to the wrong solution. So today, the Keynesian School of Economics is the biggest in the whole world. It gets taught in most universities and is kind of the standard economics many people know. Yet there are things I strongly disagree with. However, I want to start today with what Keynes actually saw, and what he saw is pretty right. He looked at the Great Depression and he thought, well, how can it be that sometimes a whole economy gets stuck and people don't have any work anymore and other people lose their companies because it just gets terrible because people can't spend any money anymore. And this is exactly what happens when the state also doesn't intervene in the economy but says, well, it's a depression, but the people have to look themselves how to get out of it again. And this is a real problem when it comes to economy. An important word maybe for this is economic cycles. There are also always economic cycles where we are in. Sometimes we're in a strong economy, the economy is growing, there's a large demand for workers and everyone can get a working space if they want to. But then we can also get into a cycle in economics that is quite bad, where people lose their jobs, people can't find work anymore, and companies get shut down. You may argue that we are at the moment in the second circle or at the start of the second cycle, that things are starting to go down. If it will continue like this and if we end in an economic crisis, this only time can tell. So what was Keynesian solution to the problem? Well, his answer was government spending, emergency funds pumped into the economy to stabilize the economy and secure working spaces. This is not so much a bad idea when you look at it in the first place, but there's trouble coming, because if you hand politicians a tool like this, it very rarely stays only for emergencies. Most of the time, when politicians have that tool, it stays. Because if you pay a subsidy once, the people receiving that subsidy depend on it and they want you to keep it. And because politicians want to stay in power or want to get voted again, they tend to keep these emergency funds then running, the subsidies running, which in the long term really damages the economy, the competition, and in the end rather damages people getting work than actually secures working spaces. So there's a real problem with that, and it is not the idea that is problematic, but it is rather because it rarely stays only for emergencies, but most of the time is getting kept also when the emergency is run out. And then, for example, also the interest rate is kept low so that the government can spend even more. And then you are coming into a circle which is quite bad and which in the end will result in an even bigger crisis. And maybe we also come into a bad situation exactly because of that. So you can see, while the Keynesian idea of government spending or interference is good in the first place, because in the short term it absolutely does stabilize the economy, in the long term, if it isn't stopped, it is very harmful. So I want to look for a short while deeper into the problem of setting the interest rate down so people can borrow money more easily, and also the government can borrow money more easily to basically put it into the economy. The problem with that is, if businesses can borrow money more easily in kind of like an unhealthy way, because if you set the interest rate down, even though it would normally be higher, then people faster can get basically money they usually would not have. So plans get realized that usually are not good, or that are usually not profitable fast enough, or also not good for the long-term business. But because they see now, oh, now I can borrow money more easily and faster, I can actually do this plan which I usually would have not done, and which usually would be too expensive when paying the interest rate. Now it is quite possible. So there will be projects started that are for the time then all right, but at some point the interest rate needs to be higher again in order to avoid inflation. And when this point comes, then the government and exactly those businesses who got the low interest rate loans are in huge trouble, because then many businesses can't pay anymore. And we see this also sometimes in different countries when there's, for example, a housing crisis. And this can come from having artificially low interest rates, people borrowing money to build houses, etc. And then the interest rate rises strongly because of a high inflation that could have not been foreseen. And then people don't pay, for example, $200 a month, but have to pay $300 a month. And this is a huge problem. This is obviously not real numbers, but just that you can imagine people can't pay then anymore what they planned to pay. And then they are in huge trouble. Some can't pay anymore, so they go bankrupt. Then houses won't be finished. Construction companies have to kick out workers because they can't pay them, because the people building the house can't pay them, and there you have a huge trouble which will lead you into a very, very deep crisis. Now, of course, this always depends, but it is generally not smart to hold the interest rate artificially low. You need it on a normal level. On the other hand, if you have it too high, then maybe plans are not getting realized that normally would work out and would be pretty good. Now, obviously, the challenge is always how to find the right interest rate. Not set it too high, not set it too low, have it natural. About this, I will make another video, however, where I will explain this in detail. So now we have to talk about the neo-Keynesians, which are basically a smarter version of the Keynesian version that is very modern. And this version basically says that there should be a group of experts and they decide every day what kind of decisions to do with interest rate, or for example with government spending, where should be spent more, where should be spent less. The idea is quite fine actually, but there's a huge problem to it, and this is how complex the economy actually is. And they often don't underestimate it, because the economy results basically out of millions of people doing millions of decisions a day. So you have very, very many tiny decisions. No expert can foresee the decisions of many people. Now, in the large scale, often you don't really see that this matters, because when the one person decides to buy a bread today instead of pasta, it doesn't really affect much. But if millions of people just do one different decision a day, it can really change how the economy runs in the short and in the long term. So there's quite a problem with that version of the Keynesian belief, because if those experts decide everything, they cannot know what all people want to do at one day. So they have quite a knowledge problem, and this is quite a famous problem. This is also a problem that you can bring forward against communist ideas, the knowledge problem. No central planner, no expert, however smart they are, they just cannot know what every person wants and every person decides at each day. You really have to respect how the human is in order to find a fitting economic principle. So yes, this fine-tuning the neo-Keynesians want to do doesn't really work well and wouldn't really work well in most cases. It would often, in the short term, look good because they could make real decisions that impact the economy positively, but in the long term, it always won't work out really because just about how complex the economy really is. Now, it would be interesting if you, for example, put an all-knowing AI into that situation that basically knows every decision everyone does in each day, and that could make predictions and thus adjust the economy and everything. That would be an interesting thing. It would maybe even work better than a committee of experts. But in the end, I would still argue it is not as good as just letting humans act. However, this is also important, and I want to tell you that, to be honest, when there is an economic crisis really, then the neo Keynesian version, the neo Keynesian idea is very right, and it is probably the best answer you can give to any economic crisis. However, it needs to be temporary. It needs to be clearly communicated and clearly in the law written down that kind of the changes they can make, etc., they are only temporary until until, for example, a certain date. And if there's still a crisis, people can vote to make the emergency things longer, or they can also vote to abandon it if it is cured before. So I think this is very important because often these things stay and then they do real damage to the economy and especially to the state household, which in the long term leads us directly into the kind of debt countries we have today with the US, which is quite terrible. And also, by the way, every other state in the European Union, for example. And these things can't be sustained over long term. And now the generations will pay for exactly that, what the generations before, the now generations, have borrowed. And this is quite a high price to pay, actually. So let's talk about Marx now. And I think here I will surprise some of you because I think Marx actually saw something which most economists don't even consider. And this is basically the fact that capitalism really is rigged in a way because it really enables the capitalists, the rich people, the upper class, the politicians, and those who own factories, etc., that they kind of block people from coming up. And they can also kind of rig the system in a way that the profit is always going up and the working class never gets what they really deserve. And they don't really have chances to go up. So that those people in power can basically control the whole system and suppress or dominate those people that are down on the floor. And this is very real. You can see it in today's economy as well. And I think we don't credit Marx enough for this really smart insight. So let's come to my critique of Marx. While his insight is very real and a real problem, he blamed the wrong thing. That's at least what I think. He blames private property and the market itself for basically creating this. And I understand why he does so, but I have to fundamentally disagree with him. Because I think it is not the market and private property, it is the political power that actually corrupts the whole system. Because through this political power, there can be created a system for licensing, or for example, subsidies to certain businesses, or kind of blocking competition. And exactly through that, there are people that are near the government or in the government, they are able to block upcomers and, for example, new companies that are, for example, created by a working class man to actually be in competition with the big companies, and they own everything and then they can actually decide. So the problem in reality is, as I think, political power and politicians. Then we can of course talk on about bailouts, or privilege through the government, where, for example, the government pays a bailout for a big company that was completely terrible. The CEO of the company earns millions and millions while the workers almost earn nothing, and there's a big gap or a big deficit in the budget of the company, and it comes from the CEO just earning way too much. But you know what the funny thing is? The CEO can earn that much because he knows, oh, the government will bail me out. He will basically pay my wage on because he doesn't want the poor workers to lose their working space. And yet the workers see nothing of that money in the end, but only the CEO. Maybe he gives himself a rise as well. And, well, bad work gets rewarded. And this is a real problem. And this is kind of political dominance. This is when the politics or those people that are near the government can rig the game into their favor, and with that really dominate the working class and destroy new competition that comes from downwards. And I think this is the way bigger problem. And I think private property is very important, and I fundamentally disagree with Marx on this. But I also think that the market in itself is not the problem. There needs to be the right laws. So what did Marx actually propose? Well, he proposed that the political class, or basically the state, does own everything, and the upper class owns nothing anymore. Or no one else than the state and the political class owns anything. Which is, in a way, of course, I understand why he thought that would be the solution, but in reality, every time this actually happened in the state, there were two huge problems. Well, the first problem was, of course, that without real prices and ownership, no economy could be calculated. And there would be long-term issues. And this was in every communist/socialist society a problem. In the short term, it could work out, surely, but in the long term, it didn't work out. It damaged the economy every single day, and in the end, it would break together. It would not work anymore because there were no real prices, no real feedback, and no ownership. And this is real trouble for an economy. So this is the first problem. The second problem is that now actually the state owns everything. So if you want to go to shop somewhere, you go to shop somewhere that the state owns. If you want to go into a bakery, you go to a bakery that the state owns. The police is controlled by the state. The military is controlled by the state. In short, there's the total power of the state. And who controls the state? Well, politicians. So you don't have now the politicians in power and the upper class, the rich people in power that kind of help themselves, help each other. Now you only have the politicians. And they can do as ever they want to do because no one has a chance against them. Everyone needs to follow what they want because they have the control over everything in the country. So if you're against the government, you have a real problem because the government has the ultimate power. And the politicians, of course, when we look into the socialists or Marxist communist states, they often had it way better than the normal workers. So you kind of have a similar problem now again, that the workers are often poor because of the damage the things do to the economy without prices and no ownership, etc. But now everything is owned by the states, the politicians have the power, and the politicians have a good life. So there lies the trouble. It is the right diagnosis, Marx had. He saw the real problem, but he just, with his solution, shifted the power from the government and the upper class, the rich people, to only the political class, the government. And now you had the real problem again. It looked maybe freer because there were no rich factory owners that could suppress their workers, but in reality, they were dominated and suppressed exactly the same way as they were in every capitalist society. So to conclude today, Keynes and Marx both saw real problems in the economy, but they both came to the solution to give more power to the government, which in the end is, as I think, the wrong solution, because in the government there are exactly humans that are limited as much as in everyday's normal life. Every human is limited. So giving more power to the government doesn't make anything better. Yes, as Keynes was right, in an economic crisis, it is absolutely right to basically make the state able to spend more money and kind of stabilize the situation. However, as we know, these emergency funds very seldom state-only emergency funds, but most of the time went into a regular budget. So there's the problem. Marx saw the real problem of domination of normal workers, etc., and came to the conclusion that there must be justice and everyone must be equal. But his solution in the end just meant the same domination or even more domination to the workers, which is also quite bad, and there was no real justice about that. What would actually be a good solution? I will talk about this more deeply in other videos, but to be very short and precise, I want to say proper money or money proper, stable interest rates that are not artificially lowered or higher, of course, and an honest government and strict laws that prohibit the government from expanding its power or expanding the time of emergency funds. Less interference into the economy by the state, but only interference in situations of crisis, as the Keynesians say very correctly. And of course, there must be clear boundaries where political power has to stop. There should be no lobbying at all, because lobbying leads us to real problems, as we see especially today. So, less government instead of more government I would advocate for. However, I hope you liked the video. I hope you could learn something. If you disagree or agree, write it down in the comments. I'm always open for critics. I wish you a great day and bye for now.